Great. Thanks, Bert. And welcome and thanks everybody for joining the second episode of AmCham's Future of Supply Chain series, co-hosted by the Apparel, Footwear, and Supply Chain Committee and also the Trade and Investment Committee. My name is David Chow. I'm the co-chair of the Trade and Investment Committee. We are delighted to have three distinguished panelists join us for today's discussion on diversifying supply chains in Asia. I'd like to first introduce the panel moderator, Barrett Bingley, who is also the co-chair of the Trade and Investment Committee. He will give us a quick overview of the topic and introduce the panelists shortly. Before we get started, just a quick membership appeal. For those who are not members of AmCham, we highly encourage you to sign up for membership to be part of the AmCham community. AmCham frequently organizes various events to provide members the latest business insights on Hong Kong, the US, and China. We want you to be part of the discussion. Please contact the membership department of the AmCham team for more information on how to become a member. Thanks, and over to you, Barrett.
Thank you very much, David. I love the membership appeal. And if you are calling in from somewhere outside of Hong Kong, don't hesitate to contact your local AmCham as well. We're a big community. So my name is Barrett Bingley. I'm a director with the Economist Group. We own the Economist newspaper and the Economist Intelligence Unit, amongst other bits. And been with the AmCham for almost a decade now. And it is absolutely one of the most exciting times to be working with the Trade Investment Committee. Supply chain diversification is today's topic. It is the second in our supply chain series. First was digitization, and that's on the web now, and you can go back and watch that. In October, we'll have a event coming up on China specifically and supply chains. And then in December, we're going to be talking about sustainability and supply chains. So really covering a lot of the major angles on supply chain diversification. And I'd like to mention, this is something, of course, at the Economist Group, we are deeply invested in trade. That's why our group was founded nearly 180 years ago. And we'll be hosting our second Asia Trade Summit, February 22nd to 25th in 2021. So please do join us for that. And if you can't find it online, please reach out and get in touch with me and I'll help you out. Our panel today are three highly experienced practitioners: Alan Chan, Managing Director of Carter's Global Sourcing; Fanny Chang, the Asia Hub Leader of PVH Far East Limited; and calling in from Vietnam, Milton D. Hagler, the General Director of Fluid Power and Controls. They're going to introduce themselves, their backgrounds in more detail in their opening remarks, as well as their companies. So a quick rundown for today. Alan, then Fanny, then Milton will speak. I have a few questions myself. We'll do some moderators' questions, and then we'll be going to audience questions. Please do type those into the chat, and I'll be pulling together some of the threads. We may or may not get to all of the questions, depends how loquacious you are on the chat. And then we'll have Sally Pang, who is the co-chair of the Apparel and Footwear Committee, wrap things up and close it off for us at about 1:45. So let me, first of all, set the scene. Let me set the macro scene. Supply chain diversification really became a hot topic once President Trump kicked off the trade war with China. Although practitioners in the industry know that diversification has been happening long before this and was really industry specific. Most of the time, supply chain diversification, as it's understood to the general public and to policymakers, refers to MNCs from Western countries, as well as their North Asia counterparts, diversifying out of China to one or more new countries, possibly leaving China altogether or possibly not. Southeast Asia has been a hot topic with Vietnam, a lot of discussion centering on Vietnam in particular, as it's been really kind of, the thought is that it's been coming up the curve, whereas Thailand, for instance, was already fairly well established. And then India with a similar sized population, and at least the stated aspiration to become a core part of supply chains. But is this what the numbers are showing? So before we get into detailed discussion from the practitioners, let me show you just a couple of slides very briefly on imports and exports. Let's see if I can get the share screen to work. There we go. Somebody let me know. Yes, can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Okay. So starting with imports, you might think, okay, why are we starting with imports? unless unless your role in the supply chain is primary goods like iron ore out of Australia, crude oil out of Saudi Arabia, right? Most players who are major parts of supply chains need incredible amounts of imports of intermediate goods, right? And you can actually track quite nicely how integrated countries are by looking at their imports and are they rising? Now, of course, there's also in-country consumption growth to factor into that, but it gives you some sense. So here you can see China's kind of stunning growth between 2016 and 2018. This is obviously coming off the back of a very high base. You can see up at the top there, China's in trillions, right? And India, China, Vietnam are sitting there in the hundreds of billions. And you can see then the effects. So China's clearly, the major player. And then 2018, 2019, the effects of the trade war start to bite a little bit, as well as less access to credit in China. Imports start to come down. And then 2020, that's a forecast figure by the EIU. We can't actually see. We don't have the numbers, obviously, for December yet. India, from a lower base, is ramped up into 2018, but actually, even before COVID, was starting to back off a little bit on imports. And then we see a modest growth, more coming out of Vietnam than Thailand, but still, a fairly modest growth. So it's a mixed story. A little bit more straightforward, although still possibly telling a mixed story, are the exports. And here you can see. There we go. Just adjust that over. Very interesting. The trade war and the pandemic seem to have had very little impact on China's exports. So if supply chain diversification is happening, what else is happening in the China economy? That's something we want to explore in episode 3. As The Economist reported this week, China's exports roared back in August, up 9.5% in dollar terms compared to 2019. And China's monthly trade surplus with the U.S. rose to $34.2 billion, the most since November 2018, which was around when the trade war kicked off. So the trade surplus is not reduced. So is supply chain diversification really happening? Well, as you can see there in the lower half of the chart, Vietnam had a very good 5-year run, increasing exports 74% until the pandemic hit. India increased much more moderately. A 5-year increase, 14.6%, including a fall in 2019, which obviously tracks with the imports. Not really a supply chain diversification winner yet, right? And maybe we'll hear about what some of those reasons are. Global stats, however, can obscure a clearer bilateral and sometimes sectoral trends. Between 2018 and 2019, Vietnamese exports to the U.S. surged 38.4%, and India's, in line with their more modest growth, in 12.4. Sorry. FDI trends also can be an indicator around diversification. Substantial year-on-year growth in Vietnam and India, but from a much lower base than China. And countries that have launched initiatives to attract MNCs to invest in their country and oftentimes, although unstated, to leave China include Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and of course the United States. And for those of you who are practitioners on the call here, you're probably familiar with all of those programs. And even last week, we had President Trump talking about a complete decoupling of the US economy. So whether it's apparel and footwear, light manufacturing, electronics, automobiles, aerospace, FMCG, every industry right now has their own factors and a whole set of countries to evaluate when considering supply chain diversification. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists. We're going to get a practitioner's perspective, how things are playing out on the ground and in the boardroom. And Alan's going to give us his perspective on supply chain diversification, what's important, what's not, how are they making decisions, what's been interesting, what's been frustrating, and then we'll move on to Fanny. So Alan, I'll turn it over to you now.
Hey, thank you, Barry. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to join this event to talk about the supply chain diversification today. I can hear someone is typing, so if you don't mind, can you put on mute if you're not talking or asking questions? Hey,
or eating lunch, yeah. Please, everyone, just take another look at your computers. Please mute, if you are not talking, as Alan said. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me begin with a brief introduction of myself. My name is Alan Chan. I'm the managing director of the Carters Inc. in Hong Kong. I'm based in Hong Kong. I oversee the Asia office. I joined the company about 6.5 years ago. Before joining Carters, I worked for some other company, for example, Ralph Lauren, Samsung Fashion, and Bewitch, etc. And let me pull out the slide I'd like to share with you. Can anyone give me a signal if whether you can see the
Yes,
screen?
we can see it.
Yeah,
Yes.
perfect. So for those you don't know Carters, we are the largest brand marketer in North America for apparel, exclusively for baby and young children. We own the Carters and Oshkosh brand, two of the most recognized brands in the marketplace. These brands are sold in the leading department stores, national chains, and specialty retailers, domestically and also internationally. And our products are also sold through approximately 1,100 company-owned operate stores in United States, Canada, and also Mexico, and of course, online. The companies also have a brand called Child of Mine, which is available at Walmart, and it's just one Jew brand. It's available at Target, and also its Simple Joy brand is available exclusively on Amazon. And the company also owns a brand called Skip Hop, which is a global lifestyle brand for family with young children. I cannot go to the second page. Okay, so talking about sourcing, we source about 800 million pieces of garment every year. Today with more than 10 countries, covering China, Southeast Asia, Central America, and Africa. And a few years ago, I remember China was our #1 sourcing country. But today, China is only our 4th sourcing country. Cambodia is today our #1 sourcing country, followed by Vietnam and Bangladesh. India is a very important growing country to us, but because of the COVID-19, we slowed down a little bit lately. Talking about the supply chain diversification, I just want to share some key drivers. So talking about the push side, of course, the rising manufacturing costs in China. With the years of rising costs in China, we have been migrating our production to other countries. Even for our offshore office, we do see the operating costs in China continuously increase. The base salary is only one thing, but after adding all the fringes, they may not be as competitive as most of the people think. And then the second thing here I'd like to highlight is the labor shortage. Believe it or not, before the COVID-19, actually, we've been hearing a lot of our factory in China telling us that they're short of workers because some of the showing workers, they would rather leave the factory and go to do some other business. For example, they would rather go to a restaurant to be a waitress or even doing foot massage because the working environment is so different. And then, of course, Barrett mentioned a little bit about the trade war, the tariff. As a matter of fact, the profit margin nowadays is already very tight, okay, for most of the company, particularly for my company, which is a children's wear, baby wear company, the margin is very tight. But if after adding the tariff, there's no way for us to survive. So I can give you an example, backpack, okay? If we continuously manufacturing the backpack in China, we have to pay up to 42.6% duty. And that's why we moved this item to some of the GSP country, Cambodia, so that at the end, we don't need to pay any duty. So 42.6% is quite a significant number. And then the next point here is talking about the US-China tension, the political risk. So I think this is very obvious. Every day when you wake up, there's some news coming out, okay? Just actually this morning when I woke up, okay, and I'm sure Fanny will talk more about that, talking about the Xinjiang cotton, but every day, okay, you have something from the Trump administration. So no one knows what will the Trump administration will do and what will the China government will respond. So we don't want to be caught in the crossfire. And then the last point here is to reduce the dependence on China. In the past few years, actually, people have already deployed strategy as China plus one to alleviate their dependence on China. We're trying to diversify our concentration risk to minimize the potential disruption to the business. And bear in mind, to develop a country isn't an easy task for many companies. With a core one approach, it easily could take up a few years to have a new country be mature to support the business. And then on the pull side, so I would say the lower labor cost, of course, is one of the reasons. As China is getting more and more expensive, relatively other countries offer lower labor costs and also solicit us to move and develop other countries. Of course, we also need to consider the total cost because the productivity from all these new countries may not be as quick as or as high as China. So this is something we need to keep in mind, the total cost. Capacity into laboring low-wage Asian country, as more and more factories in Southeast Asia are built and open up for business, the total capacity for expanding for business is available. And then, of course, a more balanced sourcing portfolio. So we don't just can't put all the eggs in one basket. And then total cost improvement. So other than the manufacturing cost, I think for our office expense or the office operating cost is also something very critical. So for example, for cutters, we have about 450 people in Hong Kong and in the Asia region. We are seeing the opportunity with some overseas satellite office, Vietnam, India, Cambodia, Bangladesh. So we'll be, other than just putting the boots on the ground, we'll be able to move some of the works to those countries to, at the end, to lower the cost in Hong Kong. FTA, the free trade agreement benefit, because for the sourcing strategy is always go after the free trade agreement. So the backpack example I just mentioned before is one of the examples that we are going to some of the FTA country so that we don't need to pay duty. And in fact, there are so many different FTA. So to just name a few related to our company, for example, the Africa, we have the AGOA, AGOA, or for the laughter in the past, now they call USMCA. So with the laughter USMCA, we can produce in Canada, Mexico, and with duty-free benefit. So these are the FTA always drive us to different country as a sourcing strategy. And then the last point I'd like to highlight here is the speed to market. Manufacturing the goods closer to the market is getting more and more important. The quicker response is really necessary nowadays. And some company have already deployed their reshoring manufacturing. So not for cutters at this moment, but I understand some of the retailer for fashion, they're already doing that. So I'd like to also share with you some of the lessons learned from growing these new countries. When we talk about supply chain diversification, we have some lessons learned, and these critical factors, critical success factors, can help us avoid setup for failure. The first one I would say is the boots on the ground. So to safeguard the quality, the compliance, the delivery, especially in the beginning. So don't assume the new factory in the new country will just follow the playbook seamlessly. And then the second point here is the talent pool. Finding the right talent is very, very important. Build a strong team is important for a long-term success. Raw materials availability. I understand a lot of people, including our company, today China is only the 4th country But when we are talking about moving out from China to another country, moving the garment manufacturing is easier comparing to moving the raw material. So even though today a lot of companies say they are moving away from China for the manufacturing of garment, but a lot of material, they are still counting on China. So the factory in Vietnam, Bangladesh, they still import a lot of material from China. And so we need to be very cautious if we are finding the local, for example, vertical fabric in Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc. We need to be cautious of higher raw material price or longer lead time or even limited capacity. So we need to keep in mind with that. Agility and flexibility. So similarly, one of the strengths of China is holistic supply chain, and it has a very strong ecosystem. They can adjust much faster and being more agile and flexible at the end when there is any unexpected issue happens. So the next point here is beware of the bandwagon. So everyone now is talking about going to India, Vietnam. It could be overheat. It could cause some bottleneck. So we need to be mindful with that. The last point I put here is about the ESG and sustainability factors. So when everyone is focusing on the cost or lead time, but do not forget about the ESG and the sustainability, particularly now with the generation, people are really watching, care a lot about sustainability, the ESG. So this is something I would say as a lesson learned. And then the last page I like to share with everyone is kind of the existing or upcoming challenges. I'm listing some of our common challenges we are facing here, but not that I have the solution, but I just leave it here for your thoughts. The first one, of course, is the cost improvement. This is referring to the product cost, but in the meantime, as well as the office operating costs, the SG&A. I think David, when he kicked off the program today, mentioned about digitalization. This is actually not a challenge. This should be classified as opportunities. So we are all trying to work smarter, moving away from the manual redundancy, and we are trying to deploy the 3D digital sampling or RPA, the robotic process automation, AI, bot train, etc. But the speed we are adapting to these technology and also the mindset change become a challenge. That's why I put here. And of course, the next one is the weaker demand as well as the consolidation of the market with distribution of the market share. So it's very obvious now, particularly after the COVID-19. Speed to market, uncertainty is the new normal. How can we move fast, more flexible with strategic planning and execution? Resilient and partnership in the supply chain, moving away being transactional to a partnership with strategic vendors. And reduction of capacity, optimize the inventory management. And the last point I put here is, of course, the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corporation, XPCC, is one of the concerns with the Xinjiang cotton. So I just list some of the challenges we are facing, and I'll stop here. I hope you found it useful, and let me turn the time to Fanny now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for the way you framed that so clearly. There's a lot to take in there. We have lots of questions I want to. One of the ones I want to ask you about later on, but we'll let Fanny know, is around what you say strategic vendor relationships. What exactly does that mean, and how is that different from a normal vendor relationship? But let's leave that. Fanny, let's turn it over to you, please.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to spend some time with you, sharing. I just finding so much in common with what Alan just said, and I trust that you find that as well. So I joined the PVH three years ago. prior to that, I was with Walmart Global Sourcing for 6.5 years, where I felt like I get a really good exposure on not only how to leverage your buying skills, but also a diversification of different products. So in Walmart, I cover Walmart Canada for all different categories that involve the general merchandising and electronics and stuff. So it's a very different perspective to the apparel world that I live in today. So really much echo with what Alan just shared. I think that last couple of years, and particularly since entering 2020, there's just so many things have happened. Not just particularly to apparel, just to all of our world, to pose so much a challenge to the supply chain, right? So I'll name a few. There are quite a bit of lessons that we learned as well. We started, I would say, the U.S.-China trade war. I think as a company, we were pretty well positioned in relatively. As this whole supply chain diversification has took place, probably start 6-7 years ago. So we had limited finished product exposure in China when the trade war started. And we thought we were in a good position. But I think in January, February, when the pandemic hit China, and when China all of a sudden shut down, all of the sewing facilities around the world, and particularly in Asia, and that with close proximity to China, were basically impacted with waiting for raw materials, waiting for trims to come from China. Then when we scrambled around China back slowly back to open, then the different regions around the world start to be impacted, to start to shut down with the same problem. So this is that moment as we go through those, it's clearly to us that, like Alan said, shifting sewing into those different countries is the easy part. So how do we make sure that we move our other supply chains, the raw materials, the trims, the packaging close to the sewing side will be what we should be looking at, right after, should be our focus go forward. And I think that the lessons we learned is that, the ideal supply chain that you really should have is to avoid getting one component from region A and then component B from region 2. So it's really having everything in one place. Then that alone not only help you mitigate those risks that demographic risks that we're talking about, we're seeing, it's also enable the speed and reduce the logistic cost, right? So for the fashion industry, that is critical. The speed of a response is really critical. So I think that would be like a very first lesson we learned. And I think this whole ban for the ban for Xinjiang cotton or XPCC on SDN, it just really emphasized what we have learned from the COVID pandemic, right? So now all of a sudden, I would say 40% of the global textile that can be impacted. So the whole apparel industry really have to really focus on how do we get the raw materials, how do we get the fabrics, the yarns out of China or getting them from other parts in China that really highlight the need and on the verticality part of this. So I would say that briefly, just some of the lessons we learned on the importance of supply chain diversification and the importance of supply chain verticality in region. So I saved the other parts for later. Barrett, get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, what a day to be having this discussion when the withhold release order was actually issued on Xinjiang cotton. Fanny, was it right that you said you think up to 40% of apparel and footwear globally could be affected by this?
Yeah.
40. Wow, I mean that is an incredible amount, and certainly puts it to a point. I think we'll have to come back to that. So let me now turn to Milton. You're based in Vietnam. Give us the view from there, a country that seems to have done pretty well controlling COVID, has certainly been talked about a lot in the media. We aren't able to go and visit. We can't do trade missions there. So we need an on-the-ground perspective, and that's you. So I'll turn it over to you, please.
Okay. Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. It's great to be participating. I'd like to show you my background image here of San Francisco, my hometown, the way it's supposed to look rather than the way it looks right now with all the fires in California. Been absolutely terrible. Let me just start off by starting my screen here, and I'll just give you a quick introduction and go over some stuff on Vietnam. So hopefully it'll be coming up here. You guys seeing it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is for about Vietnam overview for fluid power controls. If I can get the thing to go down, there we go. Okay, so my name is Milton Hagler. I'm the General Director with Fluid Power Controls located in southern Vietnam outside of Ho Chi Minh. And I've been living here since 1998 and first visited here in 1992. So I've seen quite a few changes over the last 28 years thereabouts. Native of San Francisco, which is pretty unusual. I've got an MBA from University of Hawaii, which I actually studied here in town with in-class professors, and I also have a physics degree from Sonoma State University. Fluid Power Controls was established in 2010. Excuse me, 2010. We're about 20 kilometers outside of Ho Chi Minh in a province called Bình Nhưỡng, and we export manufacture for hydraulic valves, solenoids, dispensing valves, coils. And you can see on the left here that there's some of the products that we actually export. We're part of Deltro Corporation, which was established in 1963, and we're privately held. There are 3 divisions. There's one in Milwaukee called Deltro Controls, another in Bellwood, Illinois, outside of Chicago called Deltro Fluid Products, and then Fluid Power Controls in Vietnam. And we manufacture for both divisions and also for our direct ship customers around the world, in particular in China and the US. The US is our biggest market. Okay, so this is a nice picture of Ho Chi Minh. I really like this picture a lot. It shows just how modern and grown up it's becoming. It's quite changed over the last few years, especially since I was here, the first time in 1992. There was hardly any cars. There's like hardly any motorbikes. It was mostly just bicycles. Okay, so we can see that here's a picture of the map of Vietnam with Hanoi up in the north. That's the capital city. We're down here, if you look at the bottom here in Ho Chi Minh, that's where we are, just outside there. Ho Chi Minh is a socialist republic of Vietnam. It's a single party system. It has a National Assembly and People's Council, and it changes government every 5 years. So elections are coming up in May 2012. One thing I wanted to note too is that the bilateral relationship between and the diplomatic relationship between Vietnam and US went back to normal in 1995. And if you look at the graph below, it just kind of shows the key events that happened over time with the BTA, the bilateral trade agreement with the US in 2000. So in the WTO accession in 2006. So these are critical to drive Vietnam's success today, is having this now. You can see the annual GDP rate here for Vietnam has been pretty good. It was running at over 7% in 2020 until COVID hit. And then you can see it took a big dip down to 3.82%, and then even more in July. So it's taken quite a hit, but we're now coming back. COVID is basically under control in the country. Things are starting to open back up. So hopefully we'll not have too big a hit on our GDP this year. The economists are estimating about 3% thereabouts. You can see that the economy has been growing nicely over the last few years, still relatively small, relatively speaking, and that you can see that the vast majority of the economy is manufacturing, with about almost 59%. with a bunch of other industries at much smaller percentages down in there. I said top 10 sectors plus one because I wanted to just point out the financial, banking, and insurance activities. On the last slide, I mentioned that there's an emphasis in Ho Chi Minh now of focusing on financial, setting up a fintech in Ho Chi Minh in one of the provinces here. Okay, it's a regulatory environment. So Vietnam is a common law system as opposed to a civil law system like we have in the US. They have a lot of free trade agreements. The biggest ones being the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement and then the European-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement that just came into effect in the last few months. And you've also got the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was formed after the US pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership when President Trump came into office. You've also got a bunch of other ones that drive a lot of the trade. Labor laws here are very employee-centric. They're very strong on supporting the employee and especially the female employees in particular. And the environmental laws are strengthening, getting better, which is a good thing. They definitely need to do that. They're a frontline country for the impact of climate change for sure. And you'll know that the regulatory environment here is changing very quickly. There's lots and lots of changes. It's getting more coalesced. It's starting to become better structured and getting the inconsistencies out of the system. And a lot of that's being driven by the FTAs, the World Trade Agreement agreements that they have and other obligations that they're now trying to formulate the laws to meet those obligations. In terms of corruption, it has been making progress from Transparency International. It's rated number 96 as of 2019. That's an improvement from 2018 of 117. And just to kind of give you an indication of where it sits, you can see Singapore at 4, Thailand at 101, and Malaysia at 123. Ease of doing business, it's improved, although it took a dive after 2013, went from a high of 99 now down to a 70 in 2020. So it's inching back up slowly but surely. Clearly there's more work to do there, but it is getting better bit by bit. Manufacturing sector is mostly export contract manufacturing where the companies import the raw materials duty free and VAT free, and the export duty free and VAT free. That's driving almost all the manufacturing. The workforce here is absolutely fantastic. They're great. They're really nice to work with. They're engaged. They're smart. They work really well together. It's an absolute pleasure, and it's in particular the female employees. They just are really, really good. And we always try to find women employees when we can because they're just really nice to work with. Not that the guys aren't good, but the women employees are just that much easier. The labor costs are low, although it is increasing pretty rapidly. There's been quite an increase in minimum wage over the last few years, although it's understood that for 2021, the minimum wage will be 0% increase this year because of the impact of COVID. Labor productivity is lower in the region than compared to some of the other countries. And if you look at the chart on the right, it shows Vietnam being quite low, but I think that's probably more about related to the calculation here of GDP at constant rates divided by the number of employed persons. And even though the number of employed persons is probably fairly high, I think those are probably really low underemployment, a lot of underemployment here. The country's still developing, so a lot of these numbers are probably kind of not real reflective of the actual productivity of the people themselves. Okay, infrastructure and trade logistics. The infrastructure has been slowly improving. There's been some challenges with FDI investments on infrastructure. They're now doing more private public partnerships, PPP. It's getting better. It's definitely improved. But what really surprised me when I was researching this is that the Logistics Performance Index on the table here with the spider chart, actually Vietnam didn't sit so badly. It was pretty good. I was surprised. You always hear all the time about the infrastructure being a problem with the logistics costs and dealing with customs and all and whatnot. And actually they came in not too bad. It's pretty impressive. You can see that the imports by country, China's way ahead of everybody. South Korea coming up second with 22%. And then for exports, the US is now bigger than China for exports. So that was interesting too. But clearly the imports from China can be a bit of a challenge, frankly. And just like everybody's saying before, China is definitely exporting a lot of raw materials. Okay, supply chain overview. Most materials are imported for export manufacturing. Majority of raw materials come from China. I checked with some of our people in the manufacturing committee that are in the apparel and footwear industry, and they said that they are definitely going to be impacted by the US sanctions on cotton. 80% of the cotton is coming from China. They were even talking about doing some sort of like a QR codes or some sort of a duty check, making sure that the products are actually come from China and where they're coming from, that they're checking everything really carefully, and they're starting to feel it. Now, the supply chain is weak. We're working on trying to get it developed. Link SME is, I'll have another slide on that next, that talks about the linkage for small, medium enterprise from USAID, and they had these things to say about the supply chain here. For FDI manufacturers, the thing they're finding is that they're having a difficulty in finding suppliers. It's always a challenge. There's also cost, quality, and delivery issues. And the quotations sometimes aren't very transparent. They don't provide breakdowns on costs and things like that. And there are some integrity issues floating around also. Sometimes there's a bit of an attitude that people are looking for a quick win rather than looking for long-term relationships. And it takes a little bit of time to change those attitudes. In terms of from the supplier point of view, they have a really hard time getting specialized materials. They just can't find them. You have to buy really large lots of materials, and that drives up cost and it makes it inefficient. Plus, a lot of the companies aren't even willing to take on those financial burdens because of the cost of doing that. Also, they find that sometimes that the quotations that are getting requested for the quotations of quantity from the manufacturers are too low. They're not interested in trying to deal with it. They think it's too much trouble. They can't make enough money. Now, that's a bit of an issue. Like a lot of times our quantities are quite low, so it makes it challenging for us to find suppliers that are willing to supply us. Also, they find just it hard to understand the standards of what's required from the FDI manufacturer. They don't really understand it. There's a language barrier. They're not used to working with FDI companies. So that can be a challenge for sure. And then also just sometimes they have a hard time getting suppliers buyers to give them feedback. The feedback is limited. Common issues are obviously the language barrier, English to Vietnamese, English to Chinese, English to whatever it is, can be a challenge. And then also payment terms, of course. They usually want to get a lot of money up front, but the buyer doesn't want to pay too much until they make sure they're going to be delivered the products. We tend to have the best luck with FDI-owned suppliers. They tend to perform the best. They usually have a better supply management system. They usually have better quality systems, and they can usually deliver to us. They're used to dealing with higher level supply to manufacturing to FDI companies. So they tend to do better than the others, than the local guys that are still really small. So to try to improve the local suppliers, and this would be SMEs, Vietnamese companies, USAID started a program called Linkages for Small Medium Enterprises, or Link SME. It's a $22.1 million project that has a duration of 5 years. It was started in September 2018 and runs through September 2023. And the goal is to improve the local supply chain so they can enter up into the global supply chain. And they want to try to link FDI enterprises with domestic enterprises, and also just increase the supply chain integration completely. The intent here is also to strengthen the local content and manufacturing supply chains, and to enhance the competitiveness of the SMEs themselves, and reduce compliance costs, and promote the institutional reform and streamline regulations and administrative procedures. So this has been going on. It's been pretty good. It's definitely helping. They've got experts on staff for things like Six Sigma, Lean, and quality management systems, things like that the local suppliers can leverage. They have black belts on staff for Six Sigma, so it's really quite helpful. We also have AmCham Vietnam, and it's the primary AmCham chapter of Vietnam. Has actually got the license for the country, and our goal is to make the AmCham, the business association, the most strategic, influential, and dynamic business association in Vietnam. We have 3 chapters. The primary one is in Ho Chi Minh, and then we just opened another one in Da Nang City, and then we have a charter, another chapter up in Hanoi. They tend to be a little bit separate in terms of their license where they work, but they're all basically they're still under the umbrella of AmCham Vietnam. The executive director is Mary Tornoka. She's the former consul general for the U.S. mission of Ho Chi Minh. And we have lots and lots of committees. And in particular, I am involved with the manufacturing committee. As you can see, there's a whole slew of them, so I won't go through them. You can see the website there of amchamvietnam.com if you're interested to have a look. I am on the board of governors for the AmCham Vietnam. So I am the liaison from the board to the manufacturing committee. and also to the Logistics and Supply Chain Committee right now. Okay, one thing that we do to help try to build these supply chain here is AmCham Supplier Day event that we've been holding annually for the last 6 years. And we're actually trying to proactively build the domestic supply chain from the bottom up, where we're connecting FDI manufacturers with domestic suppliers. And our next event is coming up on the 21st of October. And it's going to be a hybrid event. It's going to be in person and virtual. We have exhibitors. As you can see in the pictures below, there was an exhibition last year. And we have workshops and training classes. This year we'll do online matching. We'll have online exhibitors. And so please save the date if you're interested. It'll be virtual, so you can attend from wherever you are, which has been fantastic. It's one of the nice outcomes of the COVID issue is that we're able to draw people from all over the place, everywhere. Last manufacturing committee, we had a guy calling from Pennsylvania. So it's certainly possible to attend. There are sponsorships available, so please, if you're interested, please check it out. And so that's my plug for that. And just some final thoughts. Vietnam is rapidly developing very, very quickly since Doi Moi, which stands for reform since the early 90s. It actually, Doi Moi happened in like 88, 89. And the country was in serious economic problems. It was basically failing. People were having a hard time making any money, getting enough food, and they decided to change tactics and make it turn into more of a market economy. So it's been just quite phenomenal how fast it's been growing and how well it's done since it first did Doi Moi. I've heard many of my friends who have lived in Shanghai and who are also from Taiwan and also from Korea, South Korea, talking about that Vietnam is very similar to those countries from 20 to 30 years ago. And obviously, clearly, Vietnam is behind from the other countries like, say, Thailand, that had a bit of a better start on things compared to the history of Vietnam. The US-Vietnam bilateral relationship is flourishing. The Vietnamese government is reaching out to the US. They're having great conversations. They're really talking together and working together to try to deal with the regional issues and try to help Vietnam to be successful, which helps everybody to be successful. And it's been really fantastic. The local supply chain is challenging, but it can be overcome. You have to definitely plan to invest in your local suppliers. They need some handholding. They need to be prompted along. They need to be helped to raise up their skill level and raise up their capabilities. If they can do it, and they'll get there, but it will take some time. So typically, like I said before, that our most successful local suppliers are with our FDI the FDI invested companies in those supply companies. They tend to do the best, but the other ones, they will come along. They'll get there for sure. They're hungry, they want to learn, and they're trying their best. They just take a little bit of time. The AmCham Vietnam is actively leading and advising the business development. We're getting reached out to from the Vietnamese government, in particular the Ho Chi Minh People's Committee, to work together to help drive business regulations and get advice on how to handle things. For instance, AmCham Vietnam is very, very actively involved in helping the government to deal with COVID in a very methodical and thoughtful way that didn't have a huge economic impact. And so we provided advice up front to them, and they used that advice to try to minimize and try to minimize the impact of the COVID crisis that was happening around the world and keep things flowing as best we could. And we're seeing the benefit of that now, where we're not taking such a huge economic hit, and the country has managed it really, really well. So that has been really fantastic. The Ho Chi Minh City government has had a goal of developing an innovation district and going into smart cities and fintech over the next 25 years. So downtown Saigon will be a financial center. Out in districts 9 to Duc and District 2 will be the innovation district, smart cities and fintech, that they're developing and actively pursuing now. And they have a whole master plan over that they just presented a few weeks ago. It's actually quite interesting. Renewable energy is gaining a lot of traction here now. We got wind and now solar. There's one electrical company called EVN, Electrical Vietnam, and they're now working on tariff rates and things like that to make it attractive. It makes a lot of sense. There's tons of sunshine here, so it's good to see that's finally getting some traction. In terms of the population itself, they're very internet savvy. 70% of the population has access to the internet, and a lot of people are carrying mobile phones, and if not smartphones. Everybody's engaged on their smartphone. The government's done a really good job of keeping those costs down so that they can drive the tech. And you see people on the streets with bicycles walking around with a smartphone. You know, it's really quite something else. As I said, the COVID is handled really well. And if you look at the picture off to the side there, that's a picture from Hanoi, I believe. And it's a guy from Grab. If you maybe know them from the region, they're a delivery service and they do kind of like an Uber where they can take you around, drive you wherever you want to go. And the woman's there getting a delivery and she's using a stick for social distancing. I thought that was kind of a cute picture. So in general, the people here are really happy. They're dynamic. They're engaged. They want to learn. They're really into it. They really like it. And the food here is absolutely fantastic. This is a really, really wonderful country. And I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, what a great overview. Thank you, Milton. Both, a lot of the good things, but also, being very, very honest and putting out there some of the challenges that are yet to be overcome. That's just great. And also great to see how strong the AmCham is there. And I think that'll be a first stop for anybody, visiting once we can finally fly in. So thank you for that. I would like to go back to Alan and Fanny and ask you, and Alan, maybe could you drill a little bit more into the challenges side of things? You noted a lot of the challenges, but I think the viewers would be interested in, how are you weighting those at the moment, right? There's clearly a push and pull between speed to market, between resilience, between concentration, between labor costs versus having highly experienced employees, et cetera. So how are you, what's the system for calculating these weightings, right, when you're trying to think through these challenges? And Fanny, I think we'd be interested in the exact same thing from you, but also I think you may have had some slides that you wanted to drill into some stats with us, and if you wanted to show us those, that would be great. So we'll do that for a few minutes, and then we'll see where we're at. We might need to go right to audience questions because I can see the chat filling up. So Alan, please.
Talking about the challenges, it's hard to tell what is more important than the others. So depending on different time when we are seeing those challenges. For example, this morning when I woke up, I think the Xinjiang cotton is the most heated topic because we don't know yet. We just heard about 5 additional WRO, which is withheld and release order for 5 additional companies in China. So very quickly, we have our team go back and check whether we are doing any business directly or indirectly with those 5 companies. Fortunately, Carter's do not have any business directly or indirectly with those companies. So that means today, okay, Xinjiang cotton, these things are kind of the very hot topic. But in the meantime, we are planning for long term, how are we going to avoid these problems? I think this is much more important. The good thing is that for our company, since last June, we already set up some protocol trying to do away with these kind of problems. So we don't want to buy any Xinjiang cotton. And in the meantime, we're trying to move away from China raw material. As I just mentioned, this is not an easy thing, okay? And we do have some idea how we're trying to, because when people are talking about China, it's covering about 20% of the global cotton consumption. When we say, hey, we want to leave China and move to other country, so how are you going to do it? So Vietnam is one of the countries providing the long China cotton fabric, Bangladesh, India, but they are all different. So depending on our strategy, but we are working on that, and gradually we have a very solid plan how to navigate the challenge day by day. And on the other side, I think because of the market situation, everyone is facing a lot of challenges in terms of managing the very volatile demand as well as supply. In February, March, I think our challenges mainly focusing on the supply because the COVID-19 reside in this part of the world. So factory being shut down. So we were more worrying about the supply. But then 3 months later, starting from April, May, June, I think everyone is more concerned about the demand. So we need to strike a balance. And good thing is today, September is much better than 3 to 6 months ago. And for the baby children's apparel, so for our business, relatively, it's kind of compared to other business, we are relatively in a better shape. I won't say perfect, but the business reduction is not as big as what we anticipate. So, which is another good thing. And Barry, you asked a question talking about, hey, what do you mean about the strategic vendor? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I like to address to that as well, because that is very important. So everyone is kind of applying the 80-20 rules. So we have kind of 10 vendors out of the 80 vendors, but the 10 of them is kind of taking care 80% of the business. If not 80%, maybe 70%. So we are trying to consolidate the vendor base, trying to cut the long tail, and having the good vendor to do more business with us and name them and work with them as a strategic vendor. So we have two different levels. As a strategic vendor, at the strategic level, we may work very closely with them or even explore the opportunity together. For example, explore a new country together or putting some investment, joint venture together. And they provide something, we provide something as a joint venture. I have a good example, for example, a supplier in India, okay? They have facility in Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and then the owner said, hey, I'm seeing the opportunity with the Agoya, okay, going to Ethiopia. Can you support me, okay, and give me some of the business, because some of our core item would be very stable item. So can you give it to me so that I can take them to Ethiopia, because that country will not be response as quick as India, okay? So can you leave it to me? So we give it to them, okay, and work together, they build a factory, and we both enjoy the benefit because it's duty free. So we share the benefit of the duty saving. So this is kind of at the strategic level. But then at the tactical level, it's a more operational level. We work with all these strategic vendors in terms of sometimes the QR, the quick response, or VMI, vendor management, inventory, and pre-positioning some of the raw materials so that at the end we can cut the lead time. Or some of them may have, you understand, for the fashion industry, it's kind of very seasonal. Okay, you have a peak month, you have a low month. So we have something called level loading. Can we have the factory for their no month? They have 4,000 workers or 10,000 workers in the factory, but for the low month, they only be able to fill 20% of the production floor. Can we pull some orders and fill them additional orders so then they can feed easily 60% of the worker, something like that. So with the strategic vendor, we can work together, collaborate together, partner together to have a win-win situation. I hope I answer your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan. That was a fulsome answer. I much appreciated. Yep. Fanny, I saw you queuing up your slides there. I'd like to pass it over to you.
Now, Alan was talking about Xinjiang cotton. I thought that I shared that slide because just to give some numbers, so for people to understand that Xinjiang cotton to China and then to the world, what that scope, what the scale would be. So I thought this is a good chart. Maybe I'll just start from here, right? The first part of this chart indicated the global cotton production. So there are basically 4 or 5 larger producers in the world, and then China is one of them. It's probably second largest cotton producer in the world. I would say about 20% of global cotton production. And Xinjiang accounts 86% of China cotton. And XPCC accounts 40% of Xinjiang cotton and 34% of China cotton, right? So the ban for XPCC, it's very significant. I also want to show you the global consumption of cotton. So China not only produces 20% of global cotton, they also owns about 41% of the global spinning capacity. If anyone produce, so I would say 41% of whoever that needs to make into a fabric have to buy yarns from China. So 41% of those yarns coming from China. So at this point, because of a lack of transparency and traceability to identify what portion of, whether Xinjiang cotton or XPCC cotton go into those spinning capacities, go into those fabric productions. So it made entire China cotton or China fabric becoming suspicious. So that's why we're saying that this ban for XPCC and Xinjiang cotton impacts 40% of global textile, right? Yeah. So that's an explanation. I also wanted to, so there are some of the largest garment producers, textile countries, regions don't have cotton production. They're solely rely on imports. Bangladesh, Vietnam are one of some of the examples. So I agreed with everything Milton has said about Vietnam, about the culture, about the growth, about the development, and everything. It's exciting. I think it is. I speak to a lot of the Chinese companies. I think it is one of the most preferred country for the Chinese enterprises to go to. So because of that, I think since the trade war, Vietnam benefits most of that, and then not only I think I was at the pre-TPP stage. They got a lot of FDIs from Korea, from Taiwan, from Japan, and from us. I think during the trade war time, they got most of the investment coming from China. So this is just give you a view of the garment, U.S. garment imports from Vietnam. So as you can see, so this gray line is 2019. And you can see from 2019, Vietnam already, experienced some quite significant amount of growth. This is the market share, the U.S. government market share, right? They started from, I would say, from 2017, average of 14% of the market share, went to 18% by end of 2019. And the first 6 months of 2020, it went up to even close to 24%. So it's a significant growth. So the downside of that, so just, from my perspective, right? So we're not just looking at this from apparel perspective. So that trade war, the shift of a manufacturing shift from China, not just happen in the apparel world, it happens to all the manufacturing sectors. So for example, electronics alone, 2019 went up 40%. So in a country with 97 million population, the labor intensive industry like apparel, we are a little concerned about the saturation has reached to its maximum, right? So that would be, our view about Vietnam. It's definitely, we're seeing a service as transitional region to really mitigate the China risk, political risk, but we don't see it as a long-term go-to place for apparel, right? So that's our view. And a little bit about India. So as you can see from this chart, India didn't really gain that much of a market share with China's ex-China push, right? You see a little bit of an increase at the beginning of this year, and then just all of a sudden went down like this. So this, take notice that this is, I think overall in general, garment imports volume-wise has been reduced quite a bit because of the pandemic. But this is the market share. We just don't know what has happened there. We just see a huge drop there. I also this is also another chart to talk about who are the key players in the apparel industry. So this is the first 6 months, 2020, the U.S. import in terms of garment import in terms of volume and also value. So China today still the #1 player, and followed by Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Cambodia, surprisingly, India. So keep in mind, Cambodia, we're only talking about 16 million population, but they do play a pretty big role in the apparel industry there. So then following that is Mexico, that with that NAFTA benefits, and then quite a few, and then 3 of the CAFTA countries, which also enjoy FTA, and then Jordan and Guatemala is also CAFTA. So just I jump over to, so when we were talking about where to go to, right? Where do you go to diversify, in particular to the apparel industry? I just want to use this chart to remind everyone all the US FTAs that are in place. So how do they do? In terms of that? So as you can see, this is only the US import FTA apparel imports, for 6 months. So CAFTA definitely capture a big part of that. And then following CAFTA is, and this is 44.8%. Then following that is the NAFTA. And then this is AGOA. The gray one is AGOA. So Africa, especially the I couldn't say the word, East Africa, it's definitely to watch. It's upcoming. We saw a number showing that Ethiopia, first 6 months, apparel export to US went up 17%, when overall apparel imports reduced about 30%. Okay, so they're definitely upcoming. And also, I have to talk about Africa. I'm passionate about Africa, right? So with China, it's one belt, one road, and they're been there for a few years now. So the Chinese manufacturers and the enterprises started to get the momentum, and there are a lot of companies are setting up productions of finished garments, and then as well as the sweaters, the spinnings, and the fabrics are moving over there. So you will start to see that cluster effect start taking shape in East Africa, and then there will be a lot of growth coming out of there, right? So if I'm just comparing AGOA versus Jordan, which is also a FTA, but Jordan, as many of us from the garment industry understand, that Jordan doesn't have local labor. The garment industry there hiring international laborers going to Jordan, and they're not cheap, right? So if you compare today the share of Jordan versus AGOA, the East Africa definitely has all the benefits, all the advantage. So this will be something to look out for.
Fanny, if I just need to jump in, because I really want to get to 1 or 2 audience questions, and we only have 5 minutes left.
Sure.
So I'm not going to address the sustainability questions. There's a number of them. They're excellent questions, only because we're short on time and we have a whole session coming up on sustainability and supply chain. So thank you for those people who put those questions out there. I know there's a lot of interest in this, and we will address them, just not today necessarily. So final questions before we turn it over to Sally. I like the one about Hong Kong. To Alan and Fanny, there was a question early on: what is all this supply chain diversification? You're talking about all these countries. What does this mean for Hong Kong as a hub? We have been a toys, apparel, footwear hub, really, almost emerging since certainly since the 60s, right? What does that mean for people who've built their careers here? How's that? And then to Milton, in some ways, I hear a challenge to Vietnam. What Fanny is saying, is Vietnam at risk of like premature deindustrialization? Our wages, you mentioned it, wages are raising. Are wages going to rise so quickly that basically everyone in light manufacturing, FMCG, needs to start looking at India and East Africa, and Vietnam never rises to the level of where like South Korea and Taiwan have gotten themselves to, right? What's the risk of that? I'm sorry, we don't have too much. So I'll just, Alan and Fanny on Hong Kong.
I think,
go first? Yeah.
yeah, lady first. Fanny, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, I personally say, so today we still have a lot of product development. Our key suppliers headquartered in Hong Kong, and then this is particularly in the intimate apparel industry. I am amazed for the last 20-some years, they're still here. The key product development is still here, and the industry stayed in this area. So that's our industry.
I think Hong Kong will continuously retain a very strong leadership role. With that, some other function will be moving over to oversee central office. So for some of the basic function, PO creation, production follow-up, we'll have all those overseas office to do it. Hong Kong will keep the leadership function as a control tower to set up the strategy and the business direction.
Okay, I like the optimism. Thank you both. Milton, on labor costs and Vietnam's future.
Yeah, labor costs have definitely been going up. There's no doubt about it. At the same time, I think if you're looking for low-cost labor in the garment industry, I think Fanny's right. It's probably a diminishing return just because they're typically chasing the lowest cost that they can, and your margins are quite small. So that's why Vietnam is looking towards trying to build up into innovation and to try to build their industries that are not necessarily on just about low-cost labor. That's, like I mentioned, the innovation district in Ho Chi Minh. That's part of that's part of the drive for that. There's a lot of conversations with the U.S. government and U.S. companies about trying to help drive and push that, and also do smart cities and the likes. The education system is also being revamped to bring it up to international levels, with Fulbright University now in Ho Chi Minh, bringing in really high-level universities. You've got Vietnam German University, which is part of the German government in Binh Duong, that's also doing training